The Constitutional Court holds the final impeachment hearing for President Yoon as both sides wrap up arguments over the expulsion of the leader for his short-lived martial law imposition. The president also speaks. The nation's central bank has lowered its key rate by 25 basis points to 2.75% as part of its efforts to prop up the economy. Korea's growth forecast for this year has been revised down to 1.5%. A bridge collapsed at a highway construction site in Ansong on Tuesday morning, resulting in 10 casualties. It's February 25th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. As we begin, President Yoon Suk-yeol's final impeachment trial hearing continues, with the leader delivering his closing statements. To bring us the latest, we have our correspondent Oh Soo-young at the Constitutional Court. Soo-young, there's been anticipation surrounding what the president will say. But first, walk us through what's happened so far.
Sure, Dong-min. So President Yoon's 11th and final impeachment trial hearing began at around 2 p.m. today, some 73 days after the National Assembly passed a motion to remove him from power following his December 3rd martial law order. And as the session began, justices began reviewing evidence that they haven't scrutinized yet, then gave both the National Assembly and President Yoon's legal teams 2 hours each to present their closing arguments. The National Assembly has been arguing that Yoon's declaration of martial law was illegal and his orders on December 3rd unconstitutional. The impeachment panel said Yoon's actions subvert the country's democracy and brought disruption to the constitutional order.
President Yoon lost the people's trust and declared martial law while ranting about anti-state forces. Now it's time for him to face the consequences of his delusions.
Meanwhile, Yoon's legal team has continued to insist martial law is an executive right of the president and was declared as a warning against the dominant opposition party's tyranny in parliament that paralysed government functions through around 29 impeachment attempts. His lawyers also reiterated that the National Assembly had not been shut down, supporting Yoon's claim that, quote, nothing actually happened, and continued to raise concerns over election fraud. After wrapping up the arguments, it's now time for the closing statements by the National Assembly's impeachment panel chair Chung Chong-le and President Yoon himself. Now, President Yoon has reportedly prepared a 40-minute-long handwritten speech, and he's expected to reiterate that the purpose of his martial law was peaceful and that he was trying to bring about national unity. All eyes are on whether he would offer some kind of political gesture or compromise to draw public appeal.
And after today, the deliberation period begins with the verdict likely to be delivered around March 11th.
That's right. The ruling will be drafted around 2 weeks after the final hearing date today. And before that, though, as you said, the deliberation period begins with Presiding Justice Chung Young-sik, who's going to present his review to his 7 colleagues before all 8 justices on the bench vote either for or against impeachment. And the final ruling will be drafted based on the majority opinion. If the Presiding Justice holds a minority view, then another justice from the majority will be assigned to draft the decision. The court will then decide the date to announce the verdict, which is again expected within 2 weeks, as you said, around mid-March. If 6 or more of the 8 justices vote in favour of impeachment, then President Yoon will be removed from office, triggering a snap presidential election within 60 days. However, if at least 3 justices oppose impeachment, the motion will be dismissed and Yoon will immediately resume his duties.
In the meantime, Soo-young, public rallies for and against impeachment are likely to continue. What has it been like today?
Well, as much as today marks the last hearing of President Yoon's impeachment trial, the Constitutional Court, the area around it has been closed off for public safety and order, as large crowds are very much expected to be they have been crowding the court, the area around the court, and very much staying throughout, and we can even hear screams and chanting even now as we speak. And some 3,800 police officers have been installed around the area, in Cheongno-gu district. And that's the largest mobilization we've seen since President Yoon first started attending his hearings, around 1,000 more than the average hearing saw. Also, 190 buses have been blocking paths to the court to restrict any kind of movement coming towards the court. Around 1,500 reportedly gathered in the next street to oppose Yoon's impeachment shortly before the hearing began, and the chanting can very much still be heard from here at the court.
Right, a day full of tension indeed. Thanks, Soo-young, for keeping us updated. Staying at the Constitutional Court, the verdict on whether or not acting President Choi Sang-mok violated the Constitution in deferring the appointment of Court Justice nominee Ma Eun-hyuk will be shared at 10 in the morning this coming Thursday. This legal dispute follows the filing of a lawsuit by National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik earlier this month, after acting President Choi appointed just 2 of the 3 justice nominees recommended by the opposition-led parliament, citing the lack of bipartisan support for Ma Eun-hyuk. Assembly Speaker Woo claims Choi's decision violated the right of the parliament to nominate a constitutional court justice. If the court rules in favor of Woo and Choi proceeds to appoint Ma to the court, all seats of its 9-member bench will be filled. But it's unclear whether Ma will participate in passing judgment on President Yoon's impeachment. Moving on, policymakers at the central bank have decided to lower their key lending rate to boost the local economy, whose growth for this year has been also lowered. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
South Korea's central bank has lowered its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points as widely expected, bringing it down to 2.75%. The decision was announced on Tuesday following the second Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year, resuming its rate-cutting cycle after 2 consecutive rate cuts in October and November last year, followed by a pause in January.
The committee today determined that while concerns in the foreign exchange market remain, a further rate cut was necessary to support the economy as inflation is stabilizing, household debt growth is slowing, and signs of a significant slowdown are becoming more evident.
The central bank's decision reflects its growing concerns over South Korea's rapidly slowing economy, weighed down by both domestic and global challenges. Global trade uncertainties heightened by U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff hikes and continued political turmoil following the martial law declaration last December led the central bank to also slash its economic growth projection for 2025. Lowering its forecast for GDP growth this year by 0.4 percentage points to 1.5%. It's the first time since 2022 that the BOK has revised its projection by such a large amount. Its projection for 2026 remains unchanged, as does its outlook for consumer price inflation this year. This falls in line with forecasts from other major economic institutions such as the Korea Development Institute, which also lowered its 2025 forecast from 2% to 1.6%. South Korea's real GDP growth in 2024 came in at just 2%, falling short of the central bank's earlier forecast of 2.2%, as weak consumer spending and sluggish construction investment were further exacerbated by the domestic political crisis. The rate cut is seen as an effort to counteract economic headwinds by boosting domestic consumption and investment and preventing a steeper downturn.
I don't think you'll see any results within the next few months, and that's because there's a usual time lag between lowering the interest rate and what you see in the markets. So I think if we want to see the full effect from the interest rate cut, we need to have supplementary budget spending quickly.
However, concerns remain. The widening interest rate gap between the U.S. and South Korea, now at 1.75 percentage points, raises the risks of capital outflow, which could further weaken the Korean won and push inflation higher. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The authorities are easing their green belts for the first time in almost 20 years as part of efforts to spur business investment. Choi reports.
Greenbelt restrictions will be lifted for some areas of the country for the first time since 2008.
For the first time in 17 years since 2008, more Greenbelt land can be released. This will actively support national and regional industrial, logistics, and urban projects.
In the 5-grade Greenbelt system, the government will allow the release of Grade 1 and 2 areas holding high conservation value. These areas were not originally eligible for deregulation, but will be permitted only if alternative Greenbelt areas are designated. With this deregulation, the government plans to attract more business investments in the regions. The goal is to develop 15 key regional projects in major cities across the country, excluding the Seoul metropolitan area. The cities of Changwon and Ulsan, which had a high proportion of Grade 1 and 2 Greenbelt areas, were selected for 4 and 3 sites, respectively. Gwangju and Busan each received 3 sites, while Daejeon and Daegu were allocated 1 site each. More than 10 out of the 15 selected locations will be used for industrial and logistics complexes. The total area set to be released is 42 square kilometers, equivalent to about 5,900 football fields. 35% of that are grades 1 and 2, and the government plans to consider publicly owned land as alternative sites. The total project will cost 27.8 trillion Korean won, approximately $19.4 billion. After the development procedures are completed, the deregulation will proceed gradually starting next year. To prevent real estate speculation, these areas will be designated as land transaction permit zones, meaning any land transactions would require prior approval. Moreover, the government will launch a 1 trillion won fund for 12 national strategic technologies, including semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and advanced biotechnology. Choi, Arirang News.
Earlier this morning, structures supporting a bridge under construction collapsed in the city of Anseong, killing 4 workers. Investigations are underway to determine the exact cause of the incident. An Song-jin brings the latest.
At least 4 people died and 6 were injured, some seriously, on early Tuesday, after the collapse of concrete structures supporting a highway bridge under construction in Anseong, south of the country's capital, Seoul. All of the casualties were workers at the site on the Seoul-Sejong Expressway. The construction workers were on the underdeck installing support beams when 550-meter concrete structures collapsed. The National Fire Agency was quick to issue a nationwide emergency order while completing its rescue efforts.
The police and fire departments are cooperating to identify the exact cause of the incident, but nothing has been found so far.
However, speculation has arisen that the catastrophe may have happened in the process of installing the underdecks after one of the beams was loaded, leading one to collapse after the other like dominoes. Acting President Choi Sang-mok called for the mobilization of all available personnel and resources to prevent any further damage. The Gyeonggi Nambu Provincial Police Agency said it will form an investigative team with 78 members to determine the cause of the collapse. The police also plan to thoroughly examine whether there are any grounds to file involuntary manslaughter charges. The Ministry of Interior and Safety asked Anseong to do its best to support the victims and their family members, while the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure established a response headquarters to oversee the prompt resolution of the incident. The main contractor of the construction site, Hyundai Engineering, issued an official apology and stated that it is actively cooperating with the relevant authorities to ensure the correct identification of the cause of the collapse. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron met at the White House for talks on ending the war in Ukraine amid a shift in America's stance towards the war-torn nation. Lee Soo-jin has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron agreed on the deployment of European peacekeeping troops in Ukraine as part of efforts to end the 3-year conflict. The two heads of state met at the White House on Monday to discuss strategies for a ceasefire as European leaders seek to persuade the Trump administration to maintain its support for Ukraine and the transatlantic alliance. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is also scheduled to meet with Trump on Thursday to discuss the deployment of peacekeepers in Ukraine. But the meeting came after the U.S. earlier in the day voted against the United Nations resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This shift in stance from the previous U.S. administration has raised concerns in Europe. At the joint press conference, Macron said Europe was prepared to provide security guarantees to Ukraine.
So we have prepared, particularly with our British partners. We are ready to provide security guarantees. It could go as far as the president said, sending troops who would observe that peace was properly respected, who would position themselves not on the front line, not to enter into the conflict, but to mark their presence as a guarantee.
Macron also stressed that peace must not mean Ukraine's surrender. When asked directly about whether Russian President Vladimir Putin was ready to accept European peacekeepers, Trump remained confident.
Yeah, he will accept that. He will accept. I've asked him that question. It's time to end this bloodletting and restore peace, and I think we're going to do it. We've had some great conversations, including with Russia.
He also said that he believed that the war in Ukraine could end within weeks, adding that Zelensky could visit him at the White House in the next 2 weeks to sign a mineral deal. At a summit of European leaders held in Kyiv to mark the 3rd anniversary of the war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky echoed this, saying that he hopes that the war will be concluded this year, while also stressing the importance of having security guarantees to prevent future Russian aggression. 이수진, Arirang News.
Marking 3 years of the Ukraine war, the United Nations Security Council has adopted a U.S.-led resolution that called for an end to the war, but contained no criticism of Russia. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Yoon explains.
The UN Security Council adopted a resolution on the Ukraine war proposed by the United States that did not name Russia as the aggressor. This reflects a dramatic shift in American policy towards Ukraine under the Trump administration. It's also the first time that the 15-member council has adopted a resolution on the Ukraine war since Russia's invasion 3 years ago, as it had been unable to take any action because Russia holds veto power.
This resolution puts us on the path to peace. It is a first step, but a crucial one of which we should all be proud.
10 members voted in favor and no nations opposed, while 5 European countries abstained from the vote. Those countries, including Britain, France, Denmark, Greece, and Slovenia, attempted to amend the wording ahead of the vote to hold Russia accountable, but failed after Russia vetoed. South Korea, a non-permanent member of the Security Council, voted in favor of both the U.S.-led resolution and the European-led amendments. But it expressed disappointment, saying efforts to change the wording were not reflected in the document drafted by Washington.
In this light, the Republic of Korea voted in favor of the amendments proposed by 5 European countries, and we voted in favor of the draft resolution proposed by the United States. Although it is regrettable that the amendments we supported were not reflected.
An official from Seoul's foreign ministry told reporters on Tuesday that South Korea made the decision as the resolution pushes for a swift end to the Ukraine war, and added that it also considered the importance of the relationship between Seoul and Washington. Separately, at the UN General Assembly on the same day, Ukraine and the European Union drafted a resolution that reaffirms Kyiv's territorial integrity while explicitly naming Russia as the aggressor. The 193-member world body backed this resolution with 93 votes, while 18 nations voted against it. And surprisingly, the United States was among the countries that voted against, along with Russia, Israel, North Korea, and Sudan, once again highlighting its change of stance on the war. Unlike the Security Council resolutions, those adopted by the UN General Assembly are not considered legally binding, but are seen as a barometer of world opinion. 배은지, Arirang News.
Over in Geneva, South Korea has urged North Korea to abandon its nuclear ambitions and return to denuclearization talks. Speaking at the conference on disarmament on Monday, Second Vice Foreign Minister Kang In-sun condemned Pyongyang for violating multiple UN Security Council resolutions. She also criticized the regime for supplying weapons and ballistic missiles to Russia while deploying over 11,000 troops to help its war in Ukraine. Kang also expressed concern over the weakening of global disarmament norms amid Russia's prolonged war in Ukraine, calling on nuclear powers to strengthen trust and transparency through dialogue.
With March just around the corner, the last cold spell is finally easing off. The temperatures rose up to 7 degrees Celsius, widening the daily temperature difference by about 10 degrees. There are still many places that are slightly below the previous year's temperatures, so it will feel colder than the actual readings. Meanwhile, a small amount of rain or snow is expected in western parts of Gangwon-do province from late tonight to dawn tomorrow. However, it won't be enough to relieve the dryness. Since wildfires are increasing in this dry weather, please take extra care. Tomorrow morning's Seoul will start off at -2 degrees, Busan at 3 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 9 degrees in Daejeon and Gwangju, 11 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Warm spring weather like late March will continue until the 3일절 holiday this weekend. That's all for Korea. There are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.